Hello, this is Brian. Today is Monday, October 21st, 2024. I'm here in the Los Padres National Forest at about 5,100 feet elevation here in Ventura County along Lockwood Valley Road. And it's time for a Spotlight on Shrubs video. So today's spotlight is on the Hollyleaf Redberry. I am finally doing a spotlight video on this shrub. And this is Rhamnus ilicifolia. So what we have here is usually a small, medium, but sometimes can get to be quite a large evergreen leaf shrub. And it's in the Buckthorn family, the Rhamnaceae. So the genus Rhamnus, to which this belongs, is the namesake of the Buckthorn family. So sometimes this plant is called buckthorn. So what we have here is a fairly densely packed shrub, variable in habit, and I'll explain that in a little bit, and variable in habitat, again, which I'll be explaining momentarily as well. So this Hollyleaf Redberry has leaves that are a little bit smaller than you would find on some other specimens of the same species. But what you have here are these relatively round, sometimes ovate leaves that are slightly wavy edged, got little sharp teeth along the edge of the leaves, and sometimes have a little notch at the tip. Not always, but quite often they'll have a notch at the tip. Now again, this one has smaller leaves than a lot of other specimens I've seen, and I will talk about that more as well. So the leaves are kind of similar to holly, and that's where the Latin name ilicifolia comes from. And these can be quite strikingly beautiful shrubs. They can achieve quite large size. But yeah, what we have here, very densely foliated. Sometimes the leaves can be twice as large, sometimes even 3 times as large as these. Sometimes they could be up to about this long. And what you'll notice is that a lot of times they kind of curl. The leaves will kind of curl down from the middle. On the top, they'll curl downwards, and that is called revolute. The leaf is revolute. As you can see, a lot of these leaves kind of curl down. As you can kind of see, they kind of curl down. So, what are some other interesting things about this shrub? Well, let me go ahead and get a picture or two of the foliage, and we'll start talking more about this awesome shrub. So with this shrub, and I keep saying red berry. Why? Because it has a red berry-like drupe. So in the springtime, they have these tiny greenish yellow, white 4-lobed flowers, really tiny. You kind of have to look at them carefully to notice them. And then after they're pollinated, they turn into these very small drupes when they ripen. And if you check out my video on spiny redberry Rhamnus crocea from 2022, a very closely related species, you'll get to see some more of these, what these fruits look like, because the fruits are very similar. They are bright red when they're ripened, and they're almost translucent. You can kind of see a red glow through these fruits. So what happens is inside the pit, there's a pit that's kind of a leathery capsule-like pit that when the fruit is digested by birds and the pit in the middle is dispersed, after it's been digested, the pit will burst open and the seeds will shoot out and be laying in the ground ready for the next generation of this plant. And that's pretty common with these Rhamnus shrubs. Rhamnus ilicifolia, Rhamnus crocea, and Rhamnus pilosa, the hairy redberry. So, Rhamnus ilicifolia sometimes is known as a subspecies of the spiny redberry. So some botanists place this as Rhamnus crocea subspecies ilicifolia. So that is another name that is used for this plant. Some botanists want to push this as a subspecies. Usually the leaves are much larger than Rhamnus crocea. These are actually still a little bit larger than Rhamnus crocea, but on some species, or on some specimens, these things can grow leaves that are 3 times as large. There's another drupe right here, another berry-like drupe. Beautiful red. So it's a very ornamental shrub that would probably be pretty well amenable to cultivation. It's used to summer dry and winter moist climates. So it tends to grow a lot in Mediterranean-like climates. Warm summers, dry summers, and wetter, milder winters. But this plant has a wide elevational and ecological range. I've seen this shrub near the coastal foothills, about 10-15 miles inland from the ocean, in places like Hacienda Heights and Roland Heights, in southern Los Angeles County in the Puente Chino Hills, where this shrub is abundant and can get well over your head. And the leaves on those are usually much larger. They might get more moisture, I don't know, maybe more moisture. So sometimes in areas where there's more moisture or less exposure, they'll get much larger. So I've seen them near sea level to a couple hundred feet above sea level. And then we are here a little above 5,000 feet. And I've seen this shrub as high as about 6,800 feet in Los Angeles County's San Gabriel Mountains in Angeles National Forest. So we do have quite a wide ecological niche for this plant. I've seen it growing in coastal sage scrub near Hacienda Heights and Roland Heights. It's a place called Peter F. Scabarum Regional Park and Powder Canyon, where there are a lot of Scabarum Trail and a lot of the Powder Canyon trails. You'll see lots of these. A lot of times they'll be single trunked. Typically I see them as multi-trunk shrubs, but sometimes I've seen them as single-trunked, almost tree-shaped shrubs with a single trunk base. But a lot of times, most of the time you'll see them as multi-trunk shrubs, as you see here. So I've seen them in coastal sage scrub at Powder Canyon, over by Scabarum Park in southern LA County, right near the Orange County border. I've seen them in the chaparral of the Santa Ana Mountains in Orange County, the far inland foothills of San Diego County, and here in Ventura County, obviously. And I've seen them mixing in pretty well with the chaparral. And the highest elevation I've seen it to this day, and I'm pretty sure I'll find it higher than this, is on the Pacific Crest Trail above Vincent Gap, near near where you start hiking to Mount Baden-Powell, but not on that side. Not on the south side heading up towards Baden-Powell, but on the other side of Vincent Gap, heading up towards Jackson Flat. I've seen this at 6,800 feet in elevation in some south-facing slope chaparral mixed in with flannel bush and coffeeberry and some other manzanita species and stuff like that. So, and then sometimes you'll see this mixing in woodlands and forests as well. So I've seen this up in I see this sometimes in oak woodlands, sometimes even conifer forest. And here we're kind of in a conifer woodland here, mixed with Jeffrey pine, single leaf pinyon pine, and different types of oaks, like canyon live oak over there. So this does have quite a wide ecological niche. So sometimes you find them in the near coastal foothills, and you'll find them high up in the mountains. Now, where I live in San Diego County, usually don't start finding these until the deeper foothills going towards Ramona and then up into the Laguna and Cuyamaca Mountains. That's where you'll really start seeing them. For some reason, in San Diego County, it's mostly Rhamnus crocea until you get past Powell and Ramona, and then you start really seeing these. So yeah, this plant has a very wide ecological niche. Quite an interesting shrub. Here's some of the larger leaves. This is a little bit closer to what I typically see, but usually even larger than this. So are there any plants with which this can be confused? Most certainly. There's one similar species that also has the name hollyleaf in it, and that's the hollyleaf cherry, which is the unrelated Rhamnus ilicifolia subspecies ilicifolia. The Rhamnus ilicifolia is a large shrub in the rose family, the Rhamnaceae, and it has similar leaves, but the leaves are usually darker green and they're much wavier edged. usually larger and much wavier edged. And their fruit is also a drupe, but it's not tiny like this. It's usually a cherry about this big. So much larger fruit. And the leaves are a lot wavier and a lot spinier on the edge. So that's hollyleaf cherry. So this can be confused with it to people who are not familiar with these species, but usually there's a way to tell these apart. Much wavier leaves is the hollyleaf cherry, and these leaves that usually just curl down and are just rough edged or spiny edged around the edge, they're not as wavy and sharply spiny, it's Hollyleaf Redberry. Let me get a couple more pictures of this lovely plant, and we'll start talking about some more aspects of it. All right, so let's talk about the branches and the bark. Now, these plants do have kind of a spiky feel to them because their twigs are pretty sharp. Not really spiny, not super spiny, but the twigs are very thin and pretty sharp. They don't end in a spine or a thorn or anything or a prickle. But if you're bushwhacking through this, it'll be very hard because this plant does have a rough texture to it. So very narrow but very stiff twigs, and these leaves are leathery. Leaves are leathery is an adaptation for chaparral shrubs that have waxy coverings to conserve moisture and let less of it escape through transpiration through these thick leaves. And sometimes the curling down of the leaves also helps reduce some of the sun exposure so they don't dry out quite as quickly. But let's talk about some other stuff like the branches and the bark. Again, a very handsome shrub, can grow very densely packed, and we have this kind of neat, kind of grayish bark. Sometimes towards the bottom, sometimes it might slightly furrow a little bit. So you can see here more of a medium gray, to some slight furrowing towards the base of this trunk here. Pretty common for Rhamnus ilicifolia. So the size range of this shrub, I did mention there's a lot of variability. I told you about the size of the leaves. The leaves can vary greatly from these smaller leaves to the much larger leaves, especially the ones in the coastal canyons and ones in denser woodlands. They can have much larger leaves. But the size of these shrubs can range from a pretty small, low-growing shrub. This one's pretty small. This is a pretty humble-sized shrub. But I've seen them up to and exceeding 10 feet in height. And I don't know if it's still there. I know there have been a couple fires near Santiago Peak, and that's at the top of Orange County in Cleveland National Forest. Top of Orange County and at the border of Riverside County. Santiago Peak in the Santa Ana Mountains. There was a really tall 15-footer with a single tree-like trunk near the top of Santiago Peak. I remember I've seen that one a couple times. I don't know if it's still there, if it burnt away from some of the fires of recent times. But it used to be a really old one. If I can still find that picture, I might try to tag it on. And put it somewhere on the video. So yeah, Rhamnus ilicifolia, Hollyleaf Redberry. It's a fairly widespread shrub here in Southern California and in California in general. And I'll put down the full range of this shrub. I'll put it down in the description, but it's a pretty widespread species. I come across it fairly often. Sometimes I wish I'd come across it more often because it is a beautiful, handsome shrub. And it's such an adaptable species, growing at such a wide elevation. So I'm assuming it grows from sea level to maybe 7,000 plus feet. Again, I've seen this at 6,800 feet in the San Gabriel Mountains. So maybe I'll eventually come across it at 7,000 feet. But until then, I'll just enjoy what I have here. Rhamnus ilicifolia, Hollyleaf Redberry. Finally getting a spotlight on this shrub. So that's going to basically do it for this episode of Spotlight. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on another episode.